So the bones beneath the bling, and this is actually a 4-hour class, so we're not going to get through all of it, but we're set up to do at least the first half, and we might get a little bit into the second half. Who knows? Maybe we'll get through the whole thing. This is actually a class I've taught to real estate brokers. So I'd love to see a show of hands here, and hard for the online people, but who here has been inspecting for more than 5 years? Most of us. How about more than 10 years? More than 15 years? More than 20 years? More than 25 years? Nice. That's awesome, guys. I love it. Got some real veterans here. That's great. Okay, so for everybody, so all you guys have been doing for 25 years, you probably don't remember this, but when you did your home inspection training, it was probably what, like a 2-week class or something? That's what mine was. Did you leave class feeling as though you were adequately prepared to compare and contrast houses? No, I would say universally, we do not teach that. How many of you have been doing it for 25 years, have sat in on CE classes that help you compare and contrast houses? Not a lot, right? A little bit, maybe. But it's not, to me, this has always been really an overlooked part of our job and the training. So years ago, I wrote a book called The Confident House Hunter. I wrote it in 2016. I actually have a publisher. And the whole idea was to help home buyers and particularly real estate brokers get out in front of the home inspection, like to be able to have these tools. Like, you don't have to be a home inspector to understand a lot of our concepts, right? And so I wanted to, and a lot of this was trying to address through knowledge this whole BS that we're deal killers, right? I mean, you get all this stuff from agents, and it's like, to me, if we blew up the deal, the agent was clueless, you know. And I learned this from a really good agent in Seattle, and he was my favorite guy to work with in Seattle. And I showed up one day for an inspection, and he goes, "I'm so sorry you're here." And I'm like, "Well, good to see you, Bruce. You know, thanks." He's like, "No, I was out of town. You know, somebody else showed him the house. He made this offer. I should come back into town." I look at it. I'm like, "This is going to go totally sideways." And I'm like, "What do you mean, Bruce? It'll be fine, you know?" And of course, I get there, and we get maybe an hour and a half into it, and everything was going sideways. The deal fell apart. And how cool is that? This broker was so experienced, so knowledgeable. He knew how to look at a building. You know, he didn't take the panel cover off. He didn't get on the roof, but he knew, right? So that story was really powerful for me. I was like, a really good agent, this is matchmaking here, you know, and a really good agent can get out in front of this stuff. So that's why I wrote this book. And it was like very conceptual of like big picture stuff. We're looking at the forest here, not the trees. So our first 2 hours, we were in the weeds, weren't we? It's hard to get deeper into the weeds than the directions. So now in the second half of class, we're going to like go completely opposite. And now we're like flying at 30,000 feet. So isn't that fun? Isn't that cool that like we can have like both points of view as home inspectors? Because I would argue that one of the places we fall short as a profession is the ability to compare and contrast homes. As a provocative question, who here writes an overview paragraph in their inspection report of how the inspection went? I do. And I built it into my software, and nobody uses it except for me. But I love it. I can write a paragraph. It's very difficult and arguably full of liability. But I'm like, hey, this house is in above average condition for age and type. It's got a nice sloped roofing system that has eaves that protect the building. The siding's in pretty good shape. You know, the heat pump and the deck system are both over 20 years old and could need to be replaced at any time. Interior finishes are in pretty average condition. Like I will write a paragraph like that. How cool that I can synthesize this data. And I know a lot of inspectors don't like this. A lot of inspectors don't even like to use modifiers in their report. They just dump a bunch of data onto the client. I would argue that that really isn't doing our job. Like our job is to like interpret this data for people. I mean, anybody can make a list of stuff. The question is like, should they buy the house down the street or should they buy this house, right? I mean, that's what they need to know. So anyway, I try to do that. And these concepts could help you a lot. There's some really good stuff in my book for real estate brokers in particular. And a lot of this is like communication skills, so bigger picture stuff. So the class outline for the whole 4-hour class, we have 4 guiding principles that all houses share. For the second half of class that we may not get to is 5 guiding principles for looking at houses. So this is all stuff right from my book. So 4 guiding principles that all houses share. All houses have shortcomings. Let's kind of unpack this. And by the way, I thought I had a few other introduction slides about me. So before we dive into the class, again, I also have a software company, Scribeware, and I've got cards. So if you want to have questions after these, grab a card. I'm happy to chat with you guys about stuff. And if anybody, we've got a few scribers here that use Scribeware. I'm happy to meet with you guys after or at breaks and talk about report writing and stuff. And come see me if you have questions about any of that. And by the way, my book's available on Amazon and stuff. I have a publisher and I won a book award for it, which was kind of cool. So The Confident House Hunter. All right, so 4 guiding principles that all houses have share. Let's go over all houses have shortcomings. Do you guys agree with that statement? You ever inspected a perfect house? Never happens, right? So somebody liked my quote from this morning of low probability, high consequence, right? So I have a lot of like quotes like that I really like. So one of mine is, every house is a great house for the right person at the right price. Is that true? I really believe this. And I think agents often are like, oh my God, nobody will buy this house with this stuff. And I'm like, no, the builder will buy it. Are you crazy? Like, every house is a great house for the right person at the right price. I bought my house and I paid what I thought the land was worth. And I threw in a little bit because it had, it was cleared, it had a septic, and it had power and a well, which that's actually a lot, right? I mean, all that stuff. But when I bought my house, I figured out roughly what I thought that was worth. And I specifically didn't pay a penny for my house because I had to fix absolutely everything on it. Right? And I was a home inspector. I built, so I knew how to do this stuff. So, but does that make it a great house for somebody else? No, but it was perfect for me, and I got it at the price that worked. And did I find a bunch of things wrong that I didn't anticipate? Absolutely. But that was why I got a free house out of it, right? So I think this is an incredibly important saying, and I have had an agent say there's a butt for every seat, right? So agents should know this stuff. But there are no perfect houses, so all houses have problems. So finding the house that's right for you is choosing the problems you're willing and able to live with. This, to me, is what real estate brokers ought to know, right? It's like, this is matchmaking. You're trying to find who is the right person for this house. And if they don't get out in front of this, it's going to be us blowing up the deal, right? But that's not our fault. That's because they don't know anything about houses. How many real estate brokers take classes on how houses work? It absolutely floors me that there's no requirements for any of this stuff. Can you imagine salespeople for Boeing not knowing anything about airplanes? Oh, there's this shiny thing that's got wings over here. That is crazy to me. But anyway, the brokerages kind of enforce a lot of this stuff, and they don't know about houses. So we have to teach them. So one of the first things when I was driving around ruminating on this idea that I would write a book, I was like, okay, there needs to be a systems filter so that people understand when to freak out and when not to freak out. Who here, when they find a Zinsco panel, thinks that that's like this big deal about they shouldn't buy the house? Nobody, right? Who cares? It's an electric panel. It's a spreadsheet item. You get 3 bids, you take one, you do it, and you're done. I just don't care. How many people have had people freak out over the Zinsco panel thing? People freak out, and they shouldn't freak out. It's a system. It's a disposable system. Who cares? It's an electric panel. Put in a new one, right? So anyway, I divided house systems into 3 categories. I called them core systems, entrenched systems, and disposable systems. So let's kind of go through this. Anybody idea, who gets the question, does this house have good bones? Everybody get that question? How many of you have asked them what they mean by that? Define the bones of a house for me. What are they? Let's do it. Who wants to throw something out? What's that? Structure. So I divide that into 2 bits. There's the foundation and the frame. Those are clearly bones. What else do we have? What's another bone of a building? Nah, I don't think so. And remember, I'm king here because it's my book and my idea. So I get, I could be wrong, and that's okay. But what's that? I couldn't hear it. Grading, site. How about the site? Christ, that's the most important thing. What if you, I mean, that's like the one thing you really, really, really is hard to change is the site, isn't it? I think that's like probably the single most important thing is the site. So, and yet if somebody asks, does the house have good bones? Do you think they're thinking about the site? Maybe, maybe not, right? So I don't think we've even carefully considered this problem. That's why I thought it was fun to write a book about it. So here are my bones of a building, and you guys can say I'm wrong, and I'm totally cool with that. But I actually think the roof line is an incredibly important thing on a building. So when I was a kid, I worked around, I was a lackey on a job where there was this famous architect. And I asked him as a precocious kid, why people build ugly houses? It's a really good question, isn't it? I mean, it's weird. Like, why do people build ugly houses? And he looked at me for a minute and he goes, people design floor plans, they don't design roof lines. And he walked away. And I was like, wow, that's actually really cool. I've never thought about that. And it totally affects how you look at a building. I guarantee you, when you see a beautiful building, it's got a beautiful roof line. When you see a weird building, it's got a weird roof line. When you see a house that has structural problems, you can probably find sags and dips in the roof line. I would argue that a roof line tells you more about a building more quickly than any other component. I think this is a super cool way to just a filter to like think about building. So I think a roof line is an absolute bone of a building. And if you have a house with no roof line, a flat roof and totally exposed to the weather, how's the siding system going to do? You'll probably end up replacing it every 35 years, at least in my climate zone. And people would say, oh, they didn't flash it right or whatever, but it's taking too much weather, right? If you have a one-story building with a nice roof overhangs, who here's seen 100-year-old siding, 200-year-old siding, right? I mean, with the right building, you can get away with that. So anyway, I think the roof line. Somebody brought up the site, the foundation, the frame. How about the floor plan? I would argue that's the real bone of a building. How about you do an old house where the second story has super steep, unsafe stairs to get to it? That's a real bone of a building, don't you think? That's kind of hard to change. That space might not even really be finished square footage by code definition of it. And it would really limit who can use that space. So I think the floor plan, particularly the stairs, but a friend of mine bought this really well-built house in Portland, Oregon, that was built by a guy that was like a timber magnate. I mean, it was like incredible lumber from the 1920s or, yeah, probably built in I think it was 20s. And it was just this gorgeous house. And the owner of this timber company built it for his mom. And it was an incredible site. My friend was fairly wealthy. He lived in this place. And I did his inspection and I was like, this place is like a bomb shelter. It's a really nice house. And they hated living there. And I was like, why did you hate living there? It's like, it's a grandma house. We have 3 kids. Like, this doesn't work for us. Like, we could never figure out how to live there. And so the floor plan is really important. So frame, floor plan, who here considers access? I think access is incredibly important to the longevity of a building. When I bought a hot tub that I could remove all 8 panels of it and access every single piece of it that I could fix it. Most hot tubs, they spray a bunch of foam in the whole thing and you'll never get to it again. Which hot tub would you buy? The one with better access. My hot tub could last for like 40 years, I think. I mean, as long as I keep the wood stained, I could replace the pump, I could replace the tubes, I can replace the heater. So the same concept with a house. A house that has great access will stand a much better chance of being affordable to maintain and last a much longer time. So how about where I am? They build these townhouses that are 4 stories tall that are going to be bought by software engineers, and they don't provide access to the flat roof. I think it's absolutely insane. It's not in our code. But how many of these software engineers are going to whip out a 40-foot ladder that I'm too afraid to get on and can't control, right? Nobody's going to get there. So anyway, access. I once did a house that was a 50s house that had galvanized piping and it had super old wiring. And it was slab on grade with a flat roof and no attic. How are you going to fix all the piping and the wiring? You can't, right? So access is hugely important. How about, I've done a mansion that had these huge masonry chimneys, and the only way to fix the chimneys would be to like build an entire scaffolding system to get to them because the roof was so steep and it was just too big and you can't just like walk up to them and fix them. Access. So I really encourage you to think about access. It will add deep complexity and cost to fixing and maintaining things. All right, am I wrong or am I right? You guys like it? Yeah, I think it's a good filter. So why is it a filter? Well, if there's problems with these things, those are likely to be hard to fix, maybe impossible to fix, and expensive. Can I get an amen and hallelujah? You guys with me? Yeah. All right. So how about entrenched systems? What do we got? What's an entrenched system? Wiring, right? It's all stuck in the walls. Somebody brought up plumbing, you know. I would argue, how about siding and windows? You know, it's like you can't, that's hard to replace the windows without doing the siding and do it well. Or if you do it, you've got this sort of complex transition, right? So here's a list, but we've got siding, windows, envelope to me is an entrenched system, wiring and pipes. The frame here is a little bit of an entrenched system, like if you want to change the floor plan around. So now I'm kind of waffling a little. The frame is a little bit of a bone of a building, but it's a little bit of an entrenched system because you can change the floor plan. You can open up walls and stuff, but that's hard, isn't it? I mean, that's not like putting in a new electric panel, right? So heating and cooling distribution systems like ductwork and stuff. What would be a piece of technology that makes heating and cooling distribution less of an entrenched system? Louder. Mini splits, aren't they incredible? They completely remove this as an entrenched system problem that used to be a big problem. So I think that's really pretty cool. Thermal and air barriers, I would argue, are entrenched systems, particularly the air barriers, right? If you don't do that when all the framing and everything's open, that's gonna be hard to fix. Okay, what are the disposable systems? Nah, not plumbing. Plumbing's an entrenched system. Water heater, HVAC equipment, roof coverings, appliances, kitchens, bathrooms, paint, flooring, right? So don't you see how important this is? Like if I find problems in any of this stuff and my client's freaking out, they don't understand a house. The agent has no ability to guide them correctly if they're freaking out about this stuff. Close your eyes and you show up at a 20-year-old house that's had no updates to it. What's going to come up? All these things, every single one of them, I mean, unless they used a metal roof, right? Or, you know, some sort of fancy boiler. So, I mean, to me, this is like a car that needs new tires. Don't freak out over this stuff, right? And agents, if they don't understand this, they're really not helping themselves. Like this is a great list for real estate agents to be like, look, these are the things that it's just life with houses. You know, you buy a brand new house, you don't have to worry about it for 15 or 20 years, but then you'll have to worry about it then, right? And the price probably fluctuates a little bit depending on the degree to which these have been updated or not. Can I get some amens and hallelujah? You guys with me? All right. Cool. So that's my systems filter for buildings that I think is incredibly useful of kind of when should I freak out, when should I not freak out? Yeah. All right, so that's the end of all houses have shortcomings, and I've provided a filter that can help guide you through all these shortcomings so that you know when to freak out and when not to. So part 2 is when it comes to maintenance, simplicity is your friend. Does anybody agree with that statement? Yes. And I don't know about you guys, but where I am, like in the 80s, everybody started watching Lifestyles of the Rich and Famous. And they started building these giant homes with roofs that went on, and they've got 19 heating systems and 6,000 square feet of deck and 4 refrigerators. And I just want to shoot myself. I'm like, why would anybody in their right mind want to own all of this stuff? And for me, you know, as a home inspector, I hope you guys have learned this, but like stuff just breaks, you know? So my dream house is like, is a few moving parts as humanly possible because I hate maintaining my house. It's a pain. I want to do other stuff. All right, so let's look at simplicity as your friend. So is this a simple house? Yeah, it's really simple. Don't you love the roof line? Is that going to be an expensive roof to replace? Are there a lot of places that will leak on that roof? Is the siding likely to last a long time? So I don't even care that much about window penetrations because you got roof overhangs covering most of it. Probably easy to heat, easy to cool if you need to cool it, although it's probably not insulated very well, is it? What would be a complex system here? The structure, the site and the structure, right? It's on a hillside. So I've done, I think, like 7,000 or 8,000 inspections, and there's this guy, Al Lind in Seattle, 206-941-1777. That's his phone number. I mean, every old house in Seattle is tilting down a hill. I mean, they all are, you know, and I used to call this guy all the time, and I'm like, Al, I call him the concrete whisperer. He taught me so much about houses and structure, and he was incredible at looking at buildings and understanding how they were moving and why. And I was like, Al, why do all these old buildings have structure problems? And he goes, well, put yourself in Seattle in 1904 and build a foundation. So you go through this mental exercise and you realize that they don't have like a beautiful diesel cat to excavate the site, right? There's like probably guys with like pickaxes and shovels. If there's concrete at all, it's probably bags of concrete that are mixed by hand. Who was the manufacturer of rebar in 1905? Nobody. These things are not reinforced, right? So it's really interesting I have another class about the history of residential construction, but I think good home inspectors should be able to divide houses by age. And before they even show up at a house, if you get a 1940s house, you should be populating a list of all the things that you think are going to be good and all the things you think are going to be bad. And you should know that. That should be like, you don't even need to show up to start predicting these things. That's how you can write an overview paragraph of how the building lived up to your expectations. If you don't have expectations and you're just like, oh, there might be wiring here or something, then you can't write one of those paragraphs. Where I can write them because I don't even need to show up to make a list of things that I think I'm going to find that are going to be great and things I think are going to be bad. So anyway, you know, I bet you this house is tipping down the hill at least a little bit. I'd be shocked if it isn't. Does it look like it's on a poured foundation? The picture is not probably big enough for you to see, but I bet you this is post and pier. And this is kind of Seattle knowledge, but like a lot of these buildings that were like little beach houses back in the day, you know, and now it's like $1.5 million or some insane amount of money. It's crazy for whoever built this would just be appalled, you know, but anyway, a lot of simplicity here, but even within simplicity, you can get complexity, right? So driving around here, I came here a day early. I want to thank you guys for having me out here. I got to see an old friend of mine that I haven't seen in like 15 years. And we went and saw old Honest Abe in the monument yesterday. And I got to drive around here. And I did not see any infill that looks like this. When I was president of ASHI Washington, we had the guy out that does masonry stuff from Cincinnati, I think. I don't know if you guys have ever had him out. Can't remember his name now. It might be Clay. And I picked him up at the airport and he was like, man, you guys have wild infill around here. Like he had never seen buildings like this. So Seattle, what happened, because it's so expensive and there's no land to build on, people knock down a perfectly good house and build 6 or 8 of these stupid things in their place, which I think is a travesty, but this is the free market for us doing its thing. So is this a simple or complex building? What do we got? It's just a box. But I would say this is a pretty complicated building, huh? Boy, I mean, now we all sat through my directions class. So it's a modern construction with directions of things that were made all over the world. How many people do you think built that house? 4? Right? I mean, how many people do you think built that house? 40, 100, right? It's like an army of ants that come. How many of them know the directions to all these things they're doing? Nobody does, right? This is wild. This is like, so totally different type of construction. Does the term building science apply to this building? Only loosely, right? I mean, not really. This is like pre-building science. It's just basic, like, you get the buildings like, this is how my dad used to do it. That kind of is what applies to me to this house. Whereas this is like, this is building science, man. We've got like vapor drive and, pressure, positive or negative pressures on the inside. There's really important stuff going on here. The rain screen systems and I mean, all kinds of things. So these are really complicated buildings. And I think the people building them, the people selling them, and the people buying them, I don't think appreciate how complicated they are. Especially, last time I checked, I live in a rainforest. So, these things are going to take a lot of weather. So these are, I think, kind of scary inspections. When they're new, here's another one of my little sayings that you're welcome to steal, but the metric of how the building has performed does not exist for me. So I have no clue. Like you could be like, how will this envelope do? No idea. I can look for certain things that I know how to look for, but I have no idea how this will perform, you know? So these are like, if you're good at report writing, you're going to try to get out in front of things like this. It sounds like you guys, it seems to me like you don't have a lot of this construction. So mercifully for you, you've got beautiful old buildings here that are in nice shape, so you don't have to do this. But anyway, I have to tangle with these. And I think these are really complicated and scary home inspections. Simple or complex? Yeah, that's no brainer, right? I mean, it's a super complicated building. I mean, what's this cladding system? Who knows? This is the one where like I need to know what the manufacturer is here, because I've never seen anything like this, right? And you have to go look it up and figure it out. The balcony, the architect designed a moisture control problem with the balcony on the front, right? I mean, that's just designed to collect water and hold it against the building. That roof line is super likely to get mold. Why is it such a low slope roof? Height restrictions, right? You know, that's where I am, like you're only allowed to go so high, right? So they can't build like a proper pitched roof. So this is like total East Side, Bellevue, Washington, and they build these giant mansions that all the software people live in, and they're huge, and they have these super low slope, dinky roofs that are likely to get moldy because it's a much more difficult roof to ventilate properly. And they're so big, you tend to get a lot of air leakage up there from the building inside. Yeah, so venting the crawl space would be an interesting question. That's right. So anyway, it's a pretty complicated building. How about simple or complicated? You guys probably have some buildings like this out here, huh? When was this built out here? 80s, right? This is total 80s house. I mean, we have all these little cul-de-sacs out in the 80s, and that's pretty simple. The roof's probably going to fail, right? I mean, the whole wood shake roof thing is gone where I am. Did you guys do many of those where you are here? You know, 80s, 90s, first decade of 2000s, we had a lot of wood shake roofs. All the cedar's gone. Fire's now much greater concern than it used to be. Wildfire, so shake roofs are kind of going away. But it is a pretty simple building. Nice roof line that is not too wild. Yeah, I think pretty simple. Simple or complex? Pretty complex envelope, huh? I mean, all those little bits of trim and stuff to me that's just little places that water is going to get in. Really exposed to the weather. What are the odds this is that like whitewood trim instead of like beautiful old growth cedar? This is not beautiful old growth cedar, right? I mean, that wood, I don't even need to look to tell you there's rotted wood on that building. I don't even have to get out of the car. How about access for replumbing or rewiring or running things if you need to? These where I am are almost always slab on grade. So hard to fix, you know, hard to move things around if you needed to change. These are interesting because this is like a first generation of that fiber cement box I showed you. They've moved, now they're fiber cement boxes, but this is kind of like a late 90s version of a townhome. So these townhome things have changed and morphed over the years in Seattle. But this is, again, infill where they knock down a perfectly good, you know, 40s house or something and replace it with 5 of these things. Simple or complex? I think this is nice and simple. Love this. Why is there a covered porch? Keeps it dry. Why is that important? Why did we do covered bridges in Vermont? We didn't have pressure treated wood, really. So we had to cover our decks so that they wouldn't rot, right? Nobody built exposed decks back in the day. That was a like kind of pressure treated lumber thing, you know? So I think it's a pretty simple building. I would say, you know, what are your concerns here? The structure would be my first one. One nice thing about the old buildings is they cherry pick these beautiful sites, right? The old buildings usually have way better sites than the new buildings because they had their pick of the land. Nice simple roof line. You got great dry potential in these old buildings. I love the covered porch, but you know, structure, pipes, wires, right? You see, I don't know. I hope this is helpful. These are things that how my brain works on these. Yeah, Wilman.
I would always call out all that vegetation way too close to the house.
Yeah, I mean, that's one of those vegetation too close to the house where I am is I could probably have that comment show up before I just automatically every time. It's always the case, right? I mean, but I love it. That's a very good comment. I'm in a rainforest where somebody planted that tree like 5 years ago, and now it's like just, things grow. I'm convinced in Washington that the fir trees are just letting us live there for a little while. They're sort of biding their time, and they're going to just take back over and kick us out eventually. So, how about this one? Yeah. So I love when I teach this to real estate brokers. I love this because I've done a house like this. And when you drive in, you're going to drive in from above. You're going to park on the other side. You're going to walk through these double doors. And on the other side, it probably looks more normal, right? And you're going to go in and you're going to show this house as a real estate broker. And they're going to open the door and there's going to be a 180-degree view of Puget Sound and the Olympic Mountains. And someone is going to go, man, I'm buying this thing. I don't care how much it costs because it's so stunningly beautiful. And they don't have this perspective, do they? They haven't gone below it to be like, oh my God, it's like maintenance nightmare. Like, is this like an architect built a moisture control problem? I mean, what are the odds that this envelope lasts more than 35 years? I mean, it's almost physically impossible to install any kind of cladding roofing system that wouldn't need to just be completely redone in 35 years. So we all get it. And it's on a hillside and there's 50 million square feet of deck. And like, it's either stucco or eaves, which either way in my climate zone, this is probably 1990s. So even if it's hard coat stucco, I'd be shocked if it doesn't have moisture problems. It's just, they even added a planter under that upper window just to make sure we were like gathering enough water to like deliver into the building. It's just a total nightmare in my mind. But anyway, even agents tend to gasp when I bring up this picture because even they get that this thing is gonna present problems. So anyway, is this a helpful exercise into thinking big picture, right? This is forest, not trees. So, and understanding what's simple and what's complicated. And then this helps being a filter as a home inspector to channel your efforts. Where are you going to spend time on this? Am I going to be super preoccupied with whether I find loose receptacles here? I just don't care. I really don't. I'm going to be all over this envelope, all over the structure, all over the hillside site, all over the decks, all over underneath the balconies and the windows. There's a lot of things that might be important on another job that I might get to, but I'm going to focus on where I know the problem spots are and not worry about some other things in a building like this. You guys with me? Amen. Hallelujah. All right. So we were just looking at houses and scrutinizing houses in the big picture. I bet you guys can name for me systems that are failing more often than not. Are there systems that you guys can think of? Well, I'll let you mull it over and then I'll show you some of mine. You can think, maybe you can add to the list. How about tiled roof decks? I mean, it's like, this to me is like, just design a moisture problem for me, right? And I mean, so this was actually, I think when I did it, this house was maybe 12 years old. It was this is probably like a $5 million house. It's this gorgeous view. This deck was beautiful. It was all this like blue stone stuff, but ungauged stone. So just thinking about this tile material, if you wanted this roof to actually drain, at what pitch would you need to have your deck so that it would shed water? Yeah, I mean, you wouldn't be able to walk on it, right? I mean, so just for starters, I just glanced at this and I was like, all right, this makes absolutely no sense. They built a big sponge, basically. And so, you'd be a home inspector and you start looking around and you're like, oh yeah, it's 8 years old. It costs $250,000 to build and it's already failing, So this was an interesting one because my client that was buying it, I looked at him and I'm like, this is so beautiful. And it probably won't rot through for another 10 or 15 years. I don't know. I mean, what do you even say? Like, because you're not going to rebuild it. Look how nice it is. It's sort of a conundrum, isn't it? One of the things this is another one of my kind of like sayings, but a real estate transaction imposes a weird point of view on house maintenance. It distorts and perverts what is normal house maintenance. So this deck is clearly failing. I can prove it. I have moisture meter readings. I have no idea whether the plywood they used under it's treated. I don't know whether there's posts and beams that are treated. So there's a lot I don't know. But let's assume that they use marine grade plywood and pressure treated lumber. I don't know, you probably use it for another 20 years before like everything really falls apart. right? I mean, but how I can't say that to a buyer. I can't put that in writing, can I? So I would say this is a home inspection trap. Like I walked into this trap this morning and I was like, how am I going to wiggle my way out of this one? You know, what am I going to say that is accurate? And so I probably recommended further evaluation by a contractor and that it was failing and that, it could be complex determining an accurate scope and urgency for repair, something like that. You guys feel the same way about tiled roof decks? Do you get this design here at all? Yeah, right. I mean, and I mean, it's just not, they never end well, so it's just this constant thing. Exposed in-swing doors, right? Do those all leak? I mean, where I am, all the weather comes out of the south and the southwest. So you put a French door on the south face with a beautiful view of the water and make it in-swing, that thing will leak. I mean, I don't even have to get out of the car. Where does the weather come from here? Is it all over? Do you have a direction where stuff fails? Boxes around here, you get different. Yeah, where I am, everything's out. I mean, we get a couple storms a year out of the north, and that's when all the trees fall down because they're not used to it. But 90% of our weather is right out of the southwest. So if I want to find an envelope problem, I go to the southwest corner and look for stuff. It's always where it's the worst. Exposed wood chimney chases. They're always problems, aren't they? You guys have those out here? Yeah, I mean, it started when we stopped doing masonry and we hadn't yet made direct vent appliances, right? So there's this little window of time that we built moisture control problems onto buildings. They don't make any sense. I mean, chimneys are hard to look at these days, aren't they? They're like looking at a dinosaur that's been stuck onto a house. You guys here have a lot of beautiful old homes where the chimneys are so part of the architecture, they make sense. But where I am, a lot of the chimneys are like this and they're just crazy. Wood chimney chases. How about these atrium lights where like the water hits the roof part and then, I mean, is there rot on the siding below there? Always, right? Every time. Or there it will be because they don't have little gutters built in. I was talking to someone earlier about windows inside the shower enclosure, and part of wondering about the last class, I was wondering if the window manufacturer has any things that say that they shouldn't put the window in certain places inside of a shower. Does anybody know the answer to that? I don't. I've never looked it up, and I'm going to. But I think it's. I would doubt it too. I don't think I would find that, but you never know. I'm gonna go home and look, or one of these days I'll look. Anyway, to me, this is one of those areas. This one was in pretty good shape, but that would be something I might alert clients to that, like, hey, this could cause moisture control problems.
The way I teach it is that windows are designed to be waterproof from the outside in, but not from the inside out.
Thank you, Wilmot. Her comment was the windows are only designed to be waterproof on the outside, not on the inside. And that is, I love that. And, but I want to know what the manufacturers say. But I agree with you. And that's one of those ones that I've always lobbed it out as my opinion, and I've never found anything to have my back, right? So that was the whole point of our directions class in the morning. Where I am, low slope roofs leak. I don't know, all roofs are going to leak eventually, right? I mean, people are like, you're mean about roofs. I'm like, well, it's because they all leak. And if they're not leaking, they're going to leak, right? So you have to approach our job with a healthy skepticism of all of these systems in my mind. And I'm inspecting them for them. They need to prove to me that they're not failing. That's like my point of view of how I'm looking at this stuff. And maybe that's wrong, but that's keeps me out of trouble. So anyway, do you guys have stuff, what things, anybody have systems here that they're like, oh man, those always fail? Or a type of house? And there's one I'm thinking of that I haven't brought up that I'm wondering if you guys will lob out at me. What's that? Hardy plank. Is it ever installed perfectly? That's a really good one, right? Hardy's always, in fact, that was why I taught my Hardy class with the Hardy reps. I met this guy and we were getting into it with a builder, and I'm like, look, we're going to do a class and you're going to do 2 hours of how Hardy plank should be installed. And then I'm going to come behind you for 2 hours and I'm going to show you field slides and you're going to tell me what the heck I'm supposed to say about this stuff. But part of that was to try to ferret out, when should we freak out and when should I be like, well, it's wrong, but don't fix it. Does anybody put that in the report? It's wrong, but don't fix it. That's a scary one, isn't it? I mean, but how about like if you put the concrete porch is in contact with the fiber cement siding, who's going to rip out the concrete porch and redo that? Nobody. It'll never happen. I mean, it's just not, someday that might cause a problem and you'll have to deal with it, but you'll deal with that someday. Remember when I said the real estate transaction imposes a perverse view of house maintenance? And be careful, like be aware of that. We fall into these traps where we feel obligated to call something a repair item when in fact, nobody's going to fix it. So why would you come out and even say that it should be fixed? Because we're all scared we're going to get sued, right? You guys see these like traps that I'm trying to, I hope this helps, but one of my points of view in like these CE classes is I want to go for these little inspector traps. This is where the hard stuff is for us. A lot of our job's pretty easy, but these traps are all over the place. Yeah.
So your question about, what do you do? Hardy's a classic example because when they came out in the early 2000s with their products, their installation guidelines were probably 10% of what they are now. They offered a 50-year warranty then. They're now a 30-year warranty now.
Yep.
And they've tightened, and around 2019, they really tightened up their installation guidelines. So you'll come across these houses built in the early 2000s that were put together the way the manufacturer required them then.
Yep.
But they're not holding up. So in many cases, you're just going to say, you really just have to, this is a high maintenance house and you're going to have to keep all the seams sealed.
Yep. Hollis, did everyone online get all that? Okay, cool. Great. I love that point of view. And you're right. This is one of the traps of reading directions is the right directions have changed. So you can't apply necessarily. Remember I brought up the wood I-joists. I didn't necessarily hold an older house accountable to a code change, right? So these are another one of these traps that we have to navigate. So that's where I think good modifiers in the inspection report help. I try to make things improvement items where I feel that's warranted. Maybe one of the old installation things is causing a problem. Well, then it's a repair item, right? I mean, the good thing about time is we have the metric of how the building has performed. And that's like our old standby, like that's a great metric for us, It's like if it's rotted, like it's rotted. We don't have to get into any of this silliness, so that it's trickier when it's brand new, isn't it? Yeah.
We have a category. So you have satisfactory and however many more down you want to go. We have one that says inherent problem. It's a problem. It is a problem, but it will be very difficult to fix.
I love it. And you call it an inherent problem?
An inherent problem.
That's a cool category. I mean, I think mentally we need to go through the exercise of what do we say about things that can't really be fixed, and if it's causing a real problem that needs to be fixed, then you take it out of that category and it's like, we got to fix it. But if the concrete's in contact with the fiber cement siding, it's got a nice roof overhang, I'm not going to recommend jacking out the concrete and redoing it. I mean, that's insane. One of my very first inspections, I did a house like an 80s or 90s house, and it didn't have proper head flashings on the window trim, horizontal flashings. So I called it out, and then I went back to re-inspect it. And it was like somebody had done it with like a hatchet or something. The workmanship was so bad, and I was just devastated. I was like, oh my God, they would have been so much better off to just leave this alone and maintain it with caulking. And I felt horrible, and I learned a lot from that. I mean, it wasn't really my fault. I was sort of right, but I try to be cautious about recommending things that I think could make things worse. So that's another thing we got to be aware of, I think, in reality, so. All right. So how about a type of house that there's always, you're so likely to kill the deal? Flipped houses? I mean, flipped houses never go well, right? Why do they never go well? Well, the buyer's expectation is that everything's new. And the reality is that not everything is new, and we're going to be there to point out why not everything is new and why half the stuff that they did was done wrong, and that there's a huge amount of risk to buying this house. Flips are like, you kill like 90% of the deals on flips, right? I mean, and that's not our fault. It's the expectations of the client are that, hey, this thing's going to be brand new. And it's the most likely inspection where there's a gap between the buyer's expectations and the reality of the building. At least in my experience. Maybe you guys have great flippers around here, but yeah.
Houses with multiple additions over various time periods.
And what if that, they usually get these things at the courthouse or whatever, and they, foreclosed houses, and they never deal with the bones problems, right? It's always lipstick on a pig. And so you find, remember my list of first items, there's usually something or multiple things in that first list that they've ignored, and then they've updated all the disposable systems while ignoring the bones or entrenched systems, be another way of thinking about how those, in my experience, usually go. You add on top of it that they often install the new disposable systems in a way that is not reliable or not correct. So those are tricky. All right. Was that fun? Simplicity is your friend. Did you guys yeah? You with me? It's a good way to think about buildings. I mean, I'm always looking for simplicity and defining it from complexity, and that guides where I spend my time on my inspections. I'm not, if a house is delivering a lot of complexity to me, I'm not going to worry about loose receptacles. I'm going after all that complex stuff. And that's kind of my metric of where and how I divide my limited time on a building so that I'm hitting the most important things for sure. And I'm not saying I ignore the electric receptacles, but we all have to make these decisions. We can't always spend 8 hours on site, right? We often have a limited time. So having filters to figure out how and where you divide that time, I think is very effective. Okay, so this is kind of a cliche. You guys are going to know most of this stuff, but we'll go through it here. Water is the enemy of all houses, right? I mean, a huge part of what I do is a water inspection. I'm looking for moisture control. So I've been teaching this class for long enough that I had this slide in from, this was a little bit old when I probably started teaching this class in like 2012 or something, but $9.1 billion a year in water-related insurance claims. But then I updated it, 2024, we're up to 13 billion a year that insurance companies pay out for water damage claims. So that's only insurance companies paying out claims. I did just sort of Google it and use AI, so I don't know how accurate. I didn't go to the Library of Congress and deeply research this, but it gives us a sort of warm, fuzzy ballpark of how much insurance companies spend on water damage. So the true number is probably twice that, I'm guessing, maybe more, because, what percentage of water damage claims go to insurance? Probably a lot that don't. So, I mean, geez, we could be looking at $20–30 billion a year worth of water damage. So this is big stuff for us as home inspectors. We are looking for water, right? Amen, hallelujah. We're that's our thing. We're looking for water. So this is anybody, you guys know that Joe Seabrook? I never pronounce his name correctly, but he's Mr. Building Science Guru. I've seen him speak a bunch of times. If you ever can see him speak, he's this irreverent Canadian building science guy who's funny and a little bit belligerent but very knowledgeable. He has a phenomenal book called The Moisture Control Handbook. If you don't own it, I would get it. Maybe he's got an updated version of it, but it's really cool to think about moisture control in scientific terms. I think clients can be very overwhelmed by moisture problems because it feels as though the world, this uncontrollable force is attacking you. And when you look at it from a science standpoint, you can hey, we can figure this out. There's reasons that this is happening. We can fix them, right? So he gives you lots of good sort of science to approach things, and he divides 4 primary transport mechanisms for water: liquid flow, capillary suction, air movement, and vapor diffusion. So we'll go through a few of these. This is a pretty fun picture. Do you think the toilet's leaking upstairs? That was actually, that little bubble was completely full of water. I mean, it was like a water balloon. It's pretty cool how the latex holds the water. And you can see my moisture meter is pinned, so this is liquid flow. Plumbing leaks. Who here uses infrared? Most people. I love my infrared camera. I mean, 4 or 5 times a year, that thing finds a big thing that I wouldn't have found without it. That saves my bacon. I love that tool. So I try to, scan the ceilings, especially below plumbing, and you'll find things where you wouldn't have found them if you don't use an infrared camera. So liquid flow can obviously come from groundwater. So we're looking at basements and crawl spaces and stuff for water. What kind of siding is this? Can you guys see it well enough? LP siding, right? probably hard for you guys to see the picture, but this is a great picture. This is why LP lap siding failed here, was they didn't design the drip edge flashing well, and water would use, by capillary action, would sit on that drip edge and then just wick into the siding. So this is it. This is the money shot of why LP siding failed so badly. Did you guys have LP here? You must, right? I mean, it was all over Washington in the 90s, or that, sort of mid 90s time, and it all fails where it's exposed to the weather. I actually installed some in Colorado when I used to do construction there, but I bet in Colorado it did okay. So dry, But in Seattle, rainy climate, like this stuff, this just turns to snot in no time. I mean, it really just doesn't hold up well. But that's the money shot. So capillary action is really why LP. How much do you suppose they had to pay out due to capillary action? Right? That cost them lots and lots of money. So we all see efflorescence. We have comments in our reports for mineralization stains on basements, right? We probably all do. Water's wicking through the concrete. So we've got a combination of liquid flow outside, groundwater, rainwater, and then capillary action moving through the concrete. This is awesome. Concrete can wick water upwards through capillary action to a theoretical height of 6 miles. Isn't that amazing? I mean, concrete is like the perfect sponge for wicking water through capillary action. So absolutely phenomenal concept, So capillary action is one you don't want to sleep on. One time I did an inspection for an architect, and he bought the house and remodeled. Then he called me like a year later and he's like, I got these mold stains around my toilet on the wall. So I went out and had a look, and the wall, I used a moisture meter, the wall's soaking wet. There's like mold growing on certain walls. He had used closed cell spray foam underneath this toilet, in the crawl space. The plumber, when he installed the heating system, just doubled up the wax ring. They didn't reset the flange. So the water was leaking from the toilet through the wax ring, and it couldn't go down into the crawl space. It was hitting that closed cell foam and running on that and on the subfloor, and everywhere that the drywall was touching the subfloor, it was wicking through capillary action and making these like streaky mold stains that were like pluming up from the subfloor. Not cool. It wasn't cool for him, but it was like fascinating for me to like understand what was happening. So don't sleep on capillary action. It's an amazingly powerful force of how water moves through buildings. So we all see mold around the windows, and that's usually a combination of high relative humidity inside the building and lack of air movement. How many of us see mold on windows when the curtains stay closed in the bedroom all the time? Yeah, maybe this is a climate zone thing, but where I am, if you keep your windows curtains closed all the time in my climate zone in the winter, like you will get mold growing on those windows. You need that airflow to kind of dry things out. So again, building science classes, if you haven't done them, if you're newer to inspections, I highly recommend in doing a lot of building science. It will help you be a much better inspector. You'll start connecting the dots of why things happen, and you'll see buildings in a better way. I live in a climate zone that is absolutely perfect for mold growth on attic sheathing. So the roof decking is often moldy. And in my experience, a lot of people like to call out inadequate roof cavity ventilation as the problem for this. In my experience, this is much more inadequate air barriers. We're letting warm air go from the inside of the building, migrate up into the attic, and that warm air is carrying moisture with it, right? And it's going to condense on the first cold thing it hits, which is often the nails is the coldest thing, and then the plywood sheathing is the next coldest thing. So this is incredibly common where I am often not diagnosed correctly, even by the mold people will come out and say absolutely insane things that make no sense. And here's an interesting question for you. Which subcontractor is in charge of the air barriers in the building? Right? I mean, nobody is steering this ship. I mean, this is like a rudderless, driverless ship. And yet the air barriers in modern buildings are really freaking important. If you don't get those right, you're going to get moisture control problems. So that is one of my questions I ask my clients. Which contractor is in charge of the air barriers in the building? So I'll get to you in just a sec. I want to finish the thought. In Washington State in 2015, we have one of the most progressive energy codes in the country. A lot of people hate energy codes, think we should get rid of them. The energy code started to require blower door testing in 2015, and you have to come in the code is under 3 air changes per hour. We amended it in Washington State to under 5 air changes per hour. Either way, The builders now, when I go in and pre-drywall, look at a building, there's spray foam everywhere. Every little penetration, they have gotten in the habit of spray foaming. And I think that's a fabulous thing to do on new construction. Would the builders do that without the energy code requirement? There's not a chance in hell they're going to do that without the energy requirement. I mean, there's no way. I mean, clients don't even see it, right? It's all gets covered in sheetrock. And yet I would argue that's a really, really healthy thing for the building to stop all this air leaking around and make sure it doesn't get moldy, right? So I think good energy code policy is actually good, healthy building policy when we do it correctly. So I know a lot of people hate the energy code and want to get rid of it and all this stuff, but I see it doing good things for people. I mean, the houses in where I am from 1980 to 2015, huge percentages of moldy attics. I mean, like 40% of them have mold going in the attic. And arguably, it's not really the end of the world. It's up in the attic. It's not in your living space, but I think it's, who wants mold in the attic, right? Nobody does. So you guys with me? You guys have this problem here? I would guess you do. Do you have an energy code that requires blower door testing? Okay, great. Well, you can thank us. We're like on the leading edge of all this stuff with energy code out in Washington. So yeah.
How do you apply modern energy codes to buildings that were built around the turn of the century, 1900-ish, you know, older buildings?
Yeah, the question is how you apply energy code to older buildings. I mean, I don't, but you know, I'll often I actually have a modifier in my reports for energy efficiency items, because to me, they're not repairs. And yeah, I could use improvement, but I just thought it would be cool to make its own category of like, so to me, I'll have, you know, you could put in a heat pump and you could do some, you know, better insulation in the attic or something, but I don't really apply older, but it's helpful to understand how these codes progressed, because it helps you predict and anticipate different problems you're going to find with these buildings. I think we got another question coming, or?
Yeah, so with the older buildings, one of the things I tell people is be careful what you fix. You're going and you're replacing all the windows, you're doing all these things to make the home more energy efficient, and you're going to end up with that.
I think that's very sound advice. It's scary to start changing buildings that are working well, isn't it? There's risk to retrofitting, and like some of the PSE is like our energy company out where we are, and they've definitely made some moldy buildings by some of the things they've done. It's why I think home inspectors should be required to have top-notch building science knowledge, because not a lot of people get this stuff. The roofer doesn't get it. Most general contractors don't get it. There's not that many people that really understand how all these different pressures and systems and things come together. It's a great way for us to show our professionalism and our knowledge and help people and grow our business. Yeah.
Building science becomes even more important when you're talking about old buildings.
That's right.
Because you're trying to do reverse moisture control, because old buildings leaked like crazy right through the walls, plaster walls, brick, all that is not a vapor barrier. It's very porous to moisture. Roofs were, you know, gap skip sheathing. Our foundations were rubble rock.
Yep.
Everything was designed to breathe and allow water and moisture movement uncontrolled.
Yep.
When we start putting in vinyl siding on the outside and then on the inside called vinyl paint, latex paint,
Hey, change how the building performs.
we're changing dramatically.
Yep.
And people will come in, make huge renovations, and they won't see the problems for 5 to 7 to 10 years.
Yep.
But when they do see them, they're massive.
No, you're exactly right. And the contractors just don't know the stuff. They're not trained in building science. So you asked the question, how do you apply modern energy code to old buildings? And I would say I don't. But the building science part of it is gold. I mean, that you apply to every building, and it helps you understand everything. I mean, I remember doing a 1960s building that had the toilet tank was sweating, the windows were all moldy and condensing, you know, all the signs of like high relative humidity. And I'm like, man, this attic's going to be just coated in mold, right? And I go to open the attic and it's like perfect. Well, why is it perfect? No. Come on, 1960s where I am, how much insulation was in the attic? Like an inch. So the roof deck's the same temperature as the inside, so it's not a condensing surface. We started adding all this insulation in the attic, and that roof deck gets colder and colder and colder and colder, and dew point goes lower and lower and lower and lower, right? So this house had like serious moisture control problems, but the attic was fine because it was the same temperature as the inside of the building. Fascinating, isn't it? I mean, this is like this, like to me, that's, I apply that building science and you're always learning new, it goes on forever. It's this like fascinating world of forensics, right? And I didn't know that. I mean, it was just, I figured it out by like thinking about it and understanding the principle, you know? So cool. All right. We're not doing building science, but it was hopefully a fun little detour here. So there's a picture of new construction with vapor condensing on the nail heads, which was kind of cool. I wonder, you know, new buildings are often really wet because of all the paint and the sheetrock and stuff, you know, so possible that it's from that. That was a monitoring one. I don't use monitor much, but it was new. I kind of didn't think it would be an ongoing problem, but hard to know, you know. I mean, we're at the mercy of how the weather is when we show up, right? I love inspecting when it's just pouring rain. I mean, it's not pleasant, but it's like the best conditions to look at a building, right? So who here thinks water rots wood? What rots wood? What? Fungus, right? Organisms. So water doesn't rot wood, right? We can sink water in the, like, in the 80s, we clear cut all of our forests in the Northwest and we sold unmilled logs to the Japanese who sunk this beautiful lumber in the bottom of lakes and bays and stuff to preserve it. And this was great for our gross domestic product and it made all these logging jobs. And we got rid of all this gorgeous lumber for nothing. Funny stuff, isn't it? So in any event, they preserved this beautiful wood by sinking it in the water because the water, you know, the fungus can't get going in the water unless there's like shipworm or something. The wood will be perfectly preserved. And it's fascinating. There are companies that do salvage logging where they go to the Great Lakes or they go to places in Florida and find old growth cypress trees that are worth thousands of dollars that are just sunk in the bottom of rivers and lakes and stuff. So wood fungus and wood destroying organisms are what damage wood. And so we'll talk about dry potential, a little more building science, because we're talking about water is the enemy of old houses. So old buildings, you know, how many of us see buildings from this age that have perfectly done flashings on the cladding system like we would expect today? You never see that, right? Do you worry about it? Been like that since, you know, Abe Lincoln was president or whatever, right? I mean, if it's not rotting, like the metric of how it's performed is really powerful on buildings this old, isn't it? You're not going to go change something that's working all these years. So you don't worry about things that are like code and stuff so much when it comes to cladding. So where I am, we don't have a lot of buildings like this. There's a little town called Port Townsend that's a wooden boat place out on the peninsula. It's at the ends of the earth, and they have this beautiful town where you get this sort of construction from the 1880s. So again, complex building. This is this foolish stuff that we're building where I am now, where there's these fiber cement boxes. You know, which of these two buildings is more likely to have moisture control problems with the envelope? Yeah, the new one, right? I mean, it's just no brainer. And even though, what are the odds water leaks into that cladding system? 100%. I guarantee you that thing's leaking, right? So, and yet this might not leak, but I'm 10 times more worried about it. That's dry potential in old growth lumber, right? So dry potential, I think, is a really important concept I'm always thinking about, is how is the building going to dry? So in brick cladded assemblies, I notice you guys have a lot of brick around here. Brick over wood frame, I'm guessing, you know? And so do you look for weep holes in these? They didn't do them? Did they do them? Where I am, you know, most of them have weep holes, and the brick cladding has about a ½ inch gap between the old building paper under there, and that's dry potential, right? The brick can dry in both directions, and you can't make it just dry out. So that's why we do these weep holes. So,
but then they block them up with mortar.
well, then you don't have a weep hole. So they should, you know, I usually don't make a big thing of it, but I'll note it, you know, if I don't see them or if they seem obstructed. This is one of my favorite pictures. Can you guys see it all right? Should we turn the lights down a tiny bit? Would that help? I don't know. I don't want anybody to fall asleep. So, but this is one of my favorite pictures I've ever taken. So I'm doing this 1920s house, and you can't quite see it in this one. I have a different one. You can actually see daylight under that window, you know, and this is 1920s. So I'm thinking like, wow, you know, this window's been leaking since Dwight Eisenhower was president, you know, and it's on the south face of the building where all of our weather comes from. And you can see a water stain there, you know, so curious home inspector, you go crawling back in the attic. What do you think I found when I whacked away on the water stain? Solid wood, hard as a diamond. You probably hardly drive a nail through that wood. And that window's been leaking since Dwight Eisenhower was president. But it's phenomenal dry potential. It's on the south side of the building, so it gets wet and it dries, and it gets wet and it dries. There's no insulation on it, so it can dry really well. So this is dry potential in action. You can have a window leak for 20, 30, 40 years and it won't rot the wood. If you've got beautiful old growth lumber, you've got good dry potential, you can get away with it. So these are the things in the back of my mind when I'm looking at a building like that. I'm like, yeah, the thing is leaking tons of water, but I'm hoping you're getting away with it. And I'm looking for signs where you're not getting away with it. Right? At a certain point, you might tip a little too far and it's gonna rot. But to me, it's like walking a tightrope on those old buildings. You need enough dry potential that the fungus can't start to develop and rot the wood. Isn't that fun? You guys probably all know this, but they were using what? Yeah, beautiful old growth. I mean, this is all old growth fir that's like gorgeous framing lumber that we don't have that lumber today. And we honestly, we can't afford, I mean, who wants to pay the heat bill on that house? Not it, you know, I mean, that thing's probably like $2,000 a month to like keep the pipes from freezing, you know? So I don't want that house, you know, we have to unfortunately build more like this. It would cost you too much to maintain that thing. But you know, it's a trade-off. We lost a lot of dry potential. We don't have that beautiful old growth wood. And so we're dealing with OSB rotting. So this is an interesting building that is starting to have moisture control problems, which is alarming. But this was a platinum LEED build condo. Pretty cool. I've done inspections for people that have lived there, and their average electric bill, they'll say to me, is like $9 a month to live there. All electric house or all electric building. Pretty freaking cool. I mean, that's going to add up. These are expensive because they're like highly engineered, highly designed condominiums. That orange that you see is the weather barrier. So it's a fluid applied weather barrier. Prosecco is the name of the company, not to be confused with Prosecco, the Italian champagne. But it's pretty neat stuff. The idea behind the Prosecco is that if you just drive a nail through it, it's supposed to kind of suck around the nail and not let it leak. I mean, to me, a real problem with like Tyvek and all those things is like, as soon as you nail 50,000 nails in it, it's not water resistant anymore. So it's the idea of the fluid applied weather barrier. We'll see how this will shake out in time. But this is an open rain screen system. They have those battens on there, and they've got some wool. It's a mineral wool that they're putting in between the battens that's designed to, with capillary action, wick the water away from the fluid applied weather barrier. So pretty cool technique. Again, my clients say, Dylan, how do you know this will work well? And I'm like, I have absolutely no idea. I've never seen it before. I get the concepts, you know, I understand the building science, seems neat, but you know, good luck. May the force be with you, and give me a call in 20 years and let me know how it goes, right? I mean, hard to know. So who here inspects the footing drain system? You can't, right? You can't see it. Is that important? Yeah, drainage is really important, isn't it? You can't see it. This is a trap for home inspectors. So, you know, one of the things I like to tell clients is like, just if you have a drainage problem, you shouldn't necessarily do the most expensive fix first, right? Like to me, drainage is the classic start with the cheapest, most obvious repair and work your way back, right? That makes the most sense. How does that work in the middle of a real estate transaction? Doesn't work that well, right? So we get forced into another little trap where like we could maybe hire a drainage contractor and dig up the whole yard and put, you know, French drains in. And anybody find it maddening how people have like what they mean by a French drain means different things to different people? I found it very confusing, and everyone's all over the map, and I don't totally trust drainage guys. And I have a lot of experience in drainage in my climate zone, and drainage is, you could put in a lot of pipe in the ground that costs a lot of money and have it not do what you think it's going to do. So drainage is tricky, but this is obviously a picture of a perimeter drain tile. My footing drain is my favorite way to do drainage because you set the drain relative to the foundation. So the height of it is very predictable. If you're trying to do a curtain drain where I am, you really have to get it below the hard pan. And that's like a sort of dirt whisperer thing, right? I mean, these guys with backhoes that are really good at drainage claim they can feel where the hard pan is. But where I am, the water perks through all the soils, hits that hard pan and runs around. So there's these underground rivers of water moving underneath us on this hard pan that we can't see. I bet you it's the same out here. You guys had the glacier here 20,000 years ago or whatever, right? And that glacier created this like hard pan, and that's what the water tends to run on. That's at least where I am up in Seattle. Anyway, drainage stuff. And water leads to wood destroying organisms. You guys must have carpenter ants here, right? Yep. So I once did an inspection on a 2004 build, and it was like 10 years old, and I found one cracked tile in the main bath shower. One cracked tile. Recommended further evaluation by a tile setter, pulled it off. Turns out the builder didn't use mastic rated for wet locations and used mastic, which probably wasn't a great idea to begin with, right? So the tile setter recommended replacing like, you know, I mean, this was like $30,000 with the tile in this huge bathroom. So yeah, like, woo, called out the cracked tile, you know, like made it through that trap. And when I came out to look at it, carpenter ants were up there. I mean, how amazing is it that this insect is sitting out in the woods, going up, like looking up at the second floor of a house, being like, woo, there's wet wood up there. How the hell do they know that? Isn't that incredible? I think these things are like the most amazing organisms. I just think it's incredible that they can detect wet wood and find it in buildings. I mean, these things like went into the building, went up to the second floor of a 10-year-old building and found the wood that was getting wet behind the shower. Incredible. Anyway, I think carpenter ants are neat. We all probably, anybody find carpenter ant frass like this? I mean, I've found a few big nests where there's just like piles of frass. Pretty rare. Carpenter ants don't usually do too much damage where I am, but every once in a while they really get established. So you guys probably have these. You know what this is? So they could be confused for termites. Where I am, we do have some subterranean termites, but they're pretty darn rare. We're a little north of them. These are moisture ants. You guys have moisture ants here? Yeah, isn't it fascinating? Wood destroying organism stuff is hyper local. You got to know, like, I mean, so where I am, there's the place called West Seattle, which is outside of Seattle a little bit. And there's where you find subterranean termites, and it's all sandy soils there. So there are tons of them. But almost the entire other region that I work, you're super unlikely to find subterranean termites. So in my experience, WDO stuff is hyper localized and really interesting. So I'm still a pest inspector. I'm not required to be anymore, but I just think it's cool and I know about it. So I kept my license. So anyway, these are moisture ants. Moisture ants would indicate wet wood. And if you fix the water, they go away. So you don't have to treat for them, but, and they can look like. So what would you guys call this kind of insect damage? I bet you guys might call it powder post beetles. Yeah. So where I am, this is not hardwood. That's a fir post. So we have anabid beetles where we are. And so the anabids will get into softwood lumber and the powder posts will get into the hardwood lumber. I have only seen powder post beetles in furniture and flooring. Never seen it in the frame because all of our frame is softwood. You guys probably have hardwood framing out here in some of your older buildings where you could get powder post beetles. So anyway, this is all water stuff. Cool. Hollis, how are we doing on time?
Yeah, 15 minutes.
15 minutes?
No, you got an hour and 5 minutes.
Oh, good. We're going to get into the second part. We're going to have some fun. Location, location, location. This is like the oldest cliche in real estate, right? Yeah? So when an agent is talking about location, they're talking about like school districts and like the high price neighborhoods versus the cheap neighborhoods, right? I mean, isn't that more what an agent? 25 minutes. Okay, that's what I was guessing, more closer. But you know, when a home inspector thinks of location, do you think of it in the same way as the agent? No, I don't. To me, it's like engineering characteristics of the site. That's what I'm interested in. Remember when I said the site was a bone of a building? So I think, you know, understanding, I'm actually thinking about the site of the building I'm inspecting as I'm driving to it, right? Am I up on a hill? Am I down in a valley? I'm like, is there a road that might drain towards the site? Will it flood seasonally? I mean, these are things that I'm thinking about. And this is obvious. I mean, this is high dollar real estate where I am and a cool place, but is this like an awesome place to build? I mean, yeah, like, geez, it could hit by a landslide. It's going to rain and like all that water's coming at you sitting down here. You got the ocean coming at you from a direction. You're on the south side of an island where all the weather comes out of the south. So, I mean, this is like, this is like you might as well own a boat, right? I mean, it's worse. The boat's not going to get hit by a landslide. So tricky site here, you know, and that's by like a, you know, $4 million house or something. So hard stuff sometimes. Flat lots can be a real problem, can't they? You'd think a flat lot's a perfect place to build, but it's often not, right? It's funny, in America, we're proud of our national parks and all of our parks and where our kids play soccer and all that stuff. But if you really think about it, most of our parks, most of our soccer fields, all that stuff are built in places where you can't build because they're too wet or they're too steep or they're too inaccessible or whatever, you know? So not to not pat us on the back, but I don't think we've made huge sacrifices for these. They're usually like places that are just simply too challenging to build. So we're like, we'll make it soccer fields or whatever. Anyway, this was a park at where I live. So you guys probably don't have these kind of banks around here so much, do you? A little bit, some areas, yeah. So I mean, we have a lot of like banks and hillsides. So I have comments that soil stability is beyond the scope of a home inspection, but I'm often thinking about site characteristics, and sometimes I'm recommending a soils engineer or, you know, check any records of soils engineering. We don't get a lot of sinkholes. It's not like Florida or something, but, you know, there's been a lot of like cut fill kind of lots and things, so you can get some sinkholes around. So you guys find sinkholes around here? A little bit, but not often. I mean, that's how it is where I am. Yeah.
We have marine clay here.
Say it again?
Marine clay. Marine clay.
Oh, marine clay.
Expansive
Tell me about
soil.
marine clay. I'm interested.
Expansive soil.
It's good soil?
Expansive.
Okay. Yeah. Interesting.
So when it's dry, it shrinks, and when it gets wet, it swells,
Yeah.
and it makes the house move.
Yeah. So expansive soil problems. I've heard of that. A friend of mine's an inspector in Mississippi. They have huge problems with that down there. And I think Texas has expansive soils.
Yeah.
So yeah, these are like the regional things that this is why you like come to meetings like this, is talk with the inspectors that have been doing this a while, and you will learn this local knowledge of where soil types are. And that can be gold as an inspector to know those things. Where that's the whole second part of this class has a segment on that we won't get to, but like there's an area where I am that's a peat bog. And like, if you didn't know that, then, you know, you'll go into this crawl space and like, what the heck's going on here? You know? Yeah.
One of the tips that I've given is, if you're curious about what the whole neighborhood has done historically, is go to Google Earth
Yep.
and look at the historical view. If you're concerned about, for example, one of those hillsides moving, you can look at the
That's
imagery
awesome.
over time, and you can see whether or not that hillside has moved over time.
Is that an option in Google
Yep,
Earth? Is
Google
it
Earth. It's just part
historical
of Google
view?
Earth. Yeah, historical view.
Okay. Hopefully you guys got that online. That's a great tip. I've never done that. Awesome. Thank you. So, you know, this is like this wild house that I did that what you're looking at was the garage, and you parked in the garage and you walked down this steel gangplank, and that actually ended up landing on the roof of the house that was 3 stories tall on wood pilings built on a beach. I found so many problems with this house that I remember having the conversation with the client, and I was like, I guarantee you there's at least $250,000 of stuff to fix here on the envelope and the structure here. That's if you're completely lucky. How easy will it be to fix things on this site? Nightmare. So I was like, you know, it could be double that cost just for the access here. A propane truck once in the winter delivering propane, the driveway to the garage was so steep, it hit ice and nearly like slid off the bank. Yeah, this place was an absolute nightmare. Like, so, you know, I thought I'd killed the deal. The client's in like tears and stuff. The agent's staring daggers at me. And then I get a call a year later that's like, hey, that house you inspected, you know, was that EFIS siding on there? And I was like, did you buy that house? And they're like, oh yeah. The seller said everything that you found was wrong and that there's nothing wrong with the house. And they bought it. That's crazy. And they actually had me back to re-inspect stuff. They were nice to me about it, but it cost them $500,000 to fix everything. Anyway, people are crazy. But yeah, I think they call that a walk-up. So that was a site that I was trying to brace them for how expensive it's going to be to fix this stuff, because it was just hard to get to. Access, one of the bones of a building. The site can make tough access. Boy, the Washington coast is not like your coast out here. I'm telling you, it's like constantly blowing 40, everything rusts. These are like big 10-foot green waves smashing onto basalt, and like, it's wild. I mean, it's not like the beach out here. I grew up in the East Coast and was terrified when somebody brought me to the beach in Oregon, and it's like, it's a whole different deal. So anyway, the Washington coast is a very difficult place to build, and it will just destroy buildings. Where I am, there's huge trees, and that could be, you can get moisture control problems with the buildings. You could have them affect the foundation. Is that going to be an inexpensive tree to remove? No, that's going to cost a lot, right? So trees can be an issue. I love this picture. Where I am, this was like a 70s house. And look at the yard they gave you in the 70s. It's funny if you are like, so I'm like, I actually, it's funny, I'm a home inspector, but I think yards are cooler than houses. So if I look like, I'll move to Salt Lake City and just see what real estate's like, I look for houses built in the 50s and earlier because I know they'll have nice yards. If you look for a new house, are they going to give you a good yard? No, land's too expensive, right? So this is like one of these filters you can use to sort of predict the sites and stuff you're going to have. Sometimes the names of the streets will tell you about the soil conditions. There's a whole street where I am called Crystal Springs. What do you think's going on there? Yeah, there's more water running down that hillside than you can shake a stick at, right? I mean, I don't even need, I just read the sign and it tells me what's happening. Sandy Hook, I was doing one out here and the septic guy came out and I'm like, I bet there's good soil for the drain field. He's like, oh, it's awesome out here. It's all sandy. I knew, right? I just read the sign. How about this place? Isn't this awesome? This is in like Seattle, a town called Ballard, like one of the little suburbs north of Seattle. And which is just insane that somebody was able to do this in a city. I mean, it's just crazy. But part of the reason I brought it up is I once had a client or an agent that told me they had a client that said, I want you to find me a house on a busy street that's really loud. And he was like, nobody wants that. He's like, well, I'm a metal worker. And he wanted to have a shop in his garage and work on metal and not get yelled at. Remember, every house is a great house for the right person at the right price, right? So, now that is probably something that should be torn down. But anyway, on the busy street, that might be able to solve that problem. So here's a question for you guys. How many of your clients, when you show up at a house, leap out of the car and go, my God, they've done the most beautiful site work here? That'll never happen in the history of home touring, will it? Yeah. And yet, how important is site work to the building? Huge, right? So these are the things that we're home inspectors. So we should see through the landscaping and all the pretty stuff and look at how the site and evaluate the site and see how they prep the site for the building and see whether they did good prep or poor prep. Because no client is ever going to say that about the site work, are builders likely to do a lot of site work? No, I mean, they're going to do as little as they can. There's a good chance your site work is one of the biggest line items in your build. And nobody's going to comment on it and say what a brilliant job you did. So site work to me is one of those like really important things that I think we should be looking at as inspectors and see how they prep the site for drainage, for the foundation, all that kind of stuff. Old drains I don't trust. Do you guys? I mean, yeah. How about the clearance to grade in old buildings? It's always terrible. It's one of the Achilles heels of old cabins where I am, is they didn't lift the building above grade nicely. And so the carpenter ants and all the rest of it, and the whole base of the building is all rotted. This was a beautiful house in a really nice neighborhood, but look at how everything was built up on the back side of that house. And this was going to be a nightmare to fix. You couldn't get any earth moving equipment back there to try to deal with this. And this was what the crawl space looked like. So pretty fascinating. This was a home inspection trap. I mean, it was a multi-million-dollar house in a really high-end part of town that's, it's performed for all these years. What am I supposed to say about it? I can't even see it. But this almost got to be damage to the frame back there somewhere. That's a home inspection trap. I walked right into it and I had to like wiggle my way out somehow, So these are the things that we're tasked with. Cool. So we made it through the first half and we probably have like 5 minutes left or something. Was that fun? Did you guys like thinking in this big picture way? And was it different? I mean, it's a lot different than all the like nitty gritty stuff we were doing in the morning. And I hope that helps. But to me, having these two contrasting point of views, I think is really ultimately what our job is to be able to look at buildings in the micro way, in the tree way, and know directions and stuff, and then zoom out big picture and be able to compare and contrast in this big way. And I think if you don't try to do both things, then you end up lacking in some way. And I think it's really helpful for me. Does anybody else, like, part of my work procedure is I'll often just step back and like, I'll walk like 50 paces away from the house and just stare at it for a few minutes and just like take in what I see, the roof line and the site and how the trees are growing and all that stuff. And you'd be amazed if you take little moments like that, it can be really helpful to look at that big picture. And maybe you can end up writing one of those overview paragraphs in your report that, does an overview. Cool. Anybody have any questions? We can keep going for a little
actually
bit.
have 13 more minutes, so
15?
13, yeah.
Oh, great. Let's keep
So let's do a
going.
little Q&A.
Yeah. Well, I've got actually a whole other bit. We could just keep going. If there's no questions, we'll charge and we'll, I kind of figured it'd go a little faster. I've actually originally built this for agents. I kind of changed it for inspectors, but I figured we could move a bit more quickly. Eddie, did you have a comment or question?
Doing an inspection, if the house has water problems in the basement, if you explain to the buyer that the solution is to regrade the outside of the house, that's like throwing poison at them because they don't want to move dirt. They would rather dig out their basement floor and spend $20,000 putting drain tile on the inside to get the water out rather than fix the drainage problem. How would you address that?
Yeah, that's a good question. Well, one of the things about basement moisture that triggered to me instantly was that I have a comment, and a lot of my basement moisture comments are kind of like, you need to do with this space what you want to do with this space. If you leave it unfinished and it's just concrete, does it matter if it gets seasonally wet? I mean, the house I grew up in Mystic, Connecticut was built in the late 1800s. And when there were hurricanes, we'd put a pump down there and lift all the water out, and it just flooded, really. Well, it's been there since 1880. I mean, it's probably not great for it, but like, yeah, it wouldn't hurt anything too bad. It's still there. So, now what if the client wants to build their yoga studio down in the basement? Well, that's a different deal. So what's fascinating to me about basement moisture is it has as much to do with the client's expectations for that space as it does the space itself. So if that's helpful, that's how I address basement moisture. It's like, look, if you want a dry space down here, you can do that, but you need to take a scientific, systematic approach to waterproofing this space, because right now it looks like it gets wet seasonally. That makes sense, I also have a comment that is encouraging people to do the cheapest, most obvious repairs first. And so I have a comment that says something like, I would avoid leaping to the most expensive options first. I would start with the cheap and easy things and work your way back to more complex solutions as needed, But again, if that doesn't apply, like if you're taking a basement that's getting wet and you want a yoga studio down there, you're probably going to have to do both things and more, right? I mean, it so much depends in a basement, I think, of what the client wants to use it for, I mean, we've all been in basements that get wet and have been getting wet for like a century, right? And people store stuff up on a pallet or whatever, So I don't know. You can live with it, right? Good question. Yeah.
So when you say the cheapest way first, I couldn't agree with you more. 95% of the time, when you control the water coming off the roof, you will significantly reduce the possibility of it heading into a below grade area. Your gutters aren't clogged, you have downspouts, and very importantly, you have extensions taking it away from the house. As luck would have it, that's the cheapest avenue to take first, and it's often the most effective way to do that.
Yep.
So I couldn't agree with you more. I applaud you for suggesting taking these avenues
And
first.
the tricky part of the sort of cheapest, most obvious repairs thing in my mind is that that's not always what people want to hear in the middle of a real estate transaction. So I would argue sometimes in the middle of transactions, people end up doing much more than they might need to if they were just the same owners of the building,
Yes. The other thing is, if you regrade properly, and we can get into that later, then you're denying the water from coming in the first place. So when you respond to your client on how you would say that, if they would prefer to put a water relief system inside the house, the basement or crawl space, whatever the case is. Now you're managing water that you're allowing to get in, as opposed to denying it in the first place. And when you deliver that to your client effectively, you're not necessarily telling them which one's which and what they should do. You're sharing the information so they can make a more informed decision
I love that.
on how they want to address that. So, but the cheapest way is absolutely the most effective way. And you're spot on with what you're saying. I appreciate that.
Yeah, it's great advice. And by sharing that information, you let them make the decision of what's important to them. Because again, something like a basement, if you're going to have a yoga studio down there, then it's a really different expectation of how that space has to perform versus something that you're just storing some tools down there or something, you know? So yeah.
Go back to the 20-year rule. I'm just curious.
Oh, the 20-year rule. Where is that? Oh, the 20-year rule is gold. Jeez. Well, that's really the disposable systems, right? All right, if I show up on, this is like taught to me by my mentor, but 20-year house, I was, brand new, training around. She looks at me, she's like, 20-year-old house, what's up? And she looks at me and she goes, roof, deck, and furnace. And I was like, oh, there's a system to all this, isn't there? How long does the comp roof last? 20 years. How long does the furnace last? 20 years. How long does an exposed deck last? 20 years. So, I mean, these are the 20-year rule is gold. But if you show up at a code-built house, it's 20 years old and they've done no updates, I mean, I guarantee you I'm going to have a massive list. And that's if everything can perform perfectly, right? I mean, the roof, the decks, the HVAC equipment, the water heater, the appliances, the paint, the flooring, the kitchens, the bathrooms. I mean, some of those things are subjective. The kitchens could be incredibly well cared for. And again, could I write my overview paragraph better then? Yeah. This is a 20-year-old kitchen and I'm shocked at what great condition it's in, for 20 years old. Or it's like a lot of kitchens that are 20 years old and like everything's beat to bejesus and it needs to be updated. Yeah. So that's my 20-year rule. That thing's absolute gold for me. And I could, I mean, again, you got to find out because maybe they've updated stuff. But now for my overview paragraph, let's say I do 20-year-old house, I show up, I meet the seller, because I do tons of pre-listing, and the seller's like, we've updated the roof, we got a new heat pump 3 years ago, and we're redoing the deck now, and we've updated the kitchen and the main bathroom. Like, sweet, you've like done a lot of the big things, right? Like that's a well-maintained 20-year-old house. So 20-year rule, if your real estate agents don't know the 20-year rule, they shouldn't be in business. I mean, that is like just the most basic, like you should be able to predict this stuff, figure out what's updated and what isn't. And that whole disposable systems list is all predictable with the 20-year rule. You with me? I mean, occasionally you have exceptions. It could be a metal roof, it could be a clay tile roof or something. But by and large, like all those disposable systems every 20 years, that's just life with houses. So I love that you brought that up. Yeah, and we could predict these real quick. Knowing your local history is why we come to these meetings, why you should meet other home inspectors that work in your area, why Mac Ashy is a great thing to do, because you meet people and you learn these local tips and tricks that you're not going to look up, where a peat bog is or where there's expansive soils in a region. You can't look that up in the code. That's local knowledge, and we learn this from each other by going to stuff like this. So that's the whole thing of local knowledge. Knowing local building trends, I was alluding to elsewhere. You could call me and give me an age and a location of a house, and I can make a list of what I think I'm going to find, and that helps you set these expectations of whether it's a good house or a bad house. So local building trends, know your local history. We kind of talked about roof lines. I alluded to that, of why they're so important. The 20-year rule, and visualize the worst is important. When are we often doing our home inspections? When it's like perfect weather and it's spring and it's sunny and everything smells like flowers and stuff, right? And so for me, I'm always terrified. I'm thinking of February. Where I am in February, it could rain every day in February and be blowing 20. And that's the weather I'm afraid of. And I'm trying to think about how the house will perform in an earthquake or when it's pouring rain or, those sorts of conditions. So I don't say visualize the worst to mean, be super cynical necessarily, but you don't want to lose sight of that. Like that's when the building will get challenged, and we're often not in those conditions. I have slides in here for this that are really interesting, but I was doing a 12-year-old house-ish, and it had a heavy presidential grade comp shingle on it. Those things can last a long time. It was a nice roof. And I couldn't find anything wrong with the roof walking it. Where I am, it's dry from July 4th until a certain point in October, and then it's like the heavens unleashed. We have wet season, dry season. So I did this inspection like a couple days into when it just started pouring rain. And I'm cruising around the inside with my infrared camera, and there's these little blue spots on the ceiling. I'm like, wow, that's kind of crazy. And I put a moisture meter on them and they're wet. And I had already inspected the attic, and I don't usually like crawl through insulation because I don't want to damage the thermal barriers. But in this case, I was like, I got to go get the money shot. This roof's leaking. And I found that roof leaking in like 6 places. I never in a million years would have found that 3 days earlier. No way. There's absolutely no way I would have found that. So I try to teach agents this to like stop throwing us under the bus, because there's times like you just get lucky sometimes. That was a complete piece of luck that I just stumbled into that was not going to be findable. And what a big deal, right? I mean, this was like, it was a huge house too. I mean, this was like super scary, and like one of those ones that, I mean, we all had those moments where you find stuff and you're like, Jesus, I was so lucky to find that. I could have so easily missed that. And it's a humbling job from that perspective. It's really easy to miss things. Yeah.
We have a, oh, I'm sorry.
So in this area, we look at new construction coming along. We know up until the 50s, we're pretty much getting solid masonry construction, and beyond that, everything is shifted to framing and so on and so forth. It's almost like the construction of homes has transitioned to the point, one, to save money, but two, now when you look at a house that's built today, we don't know how long it's going to last. Whereas a 50s house could last easily 150, 200
Right.
years. In DC, we have row houses that are, over 200 years old. My expectation would not be that we could build a house today that would last 200 years. The only positive thing with new construction today are concrete foundations.
Yes.
But everything else has kind of shifted. It's almost like if you could calculate the percentage of a house that had disposable properties in the 50s versus now, I would almost think that half the house would be
I
considered
love that
disposable.
comment. So true. Absolutely true. The only thing I would have exception there is, how about energy efficiency? I mean, a modern building uses a third the energy that the same old house used. Maybe, I mean, I grew up in Mystic, Connecticut in a house built in the 1880s. And I mean, it just about broke my dad to keep the pipes from freezing. I mean, that thing, and we wore like sweaters and like lived in a room with a fire. I mean, that thing was uncomfortable. My kids in my house now running around in their underpants all winter. I mean, it's like, they're so comfortable. My house is always 70 degrees, So anyway, I think comfort has changed dramatically and for the better.